Good evening, everyone. Yat ef ine shike ado shidnae sheya Tatiana Benali yanishke. Tchohtona sha na nesaja tachini nishlin nashasha dinae bashichin and kimflichini dashiche. My name is Tatiana Benali. I am from Sebita on the Navajo Nation. I am the Zuni clan of Tachitni and born for the Tewa Bear Clan. I currently reside here in Lenapehoking, and I'm here with the American Indian Community House. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is a series hosted by the American Indian Community House to provide an intentional online space to collectively explore and discuss resources and information regarding Indigenous issues and conflicts that directly affect us today. Through shared concerns and efforts, we will discuss actions, solutions, and the many different ways we can contribute toward the movement and change making. Online in solidarity, led by and for Indigenous folks, we will focus on providing a space that is accessible, respectful, and in unity. Check out the American Indian Community House on Instagram, Facebook, or sign up with a newsletter from the H website to keep up to date on the upcoming events. There is programming on Wellbriety supports, elder storytelling, makers labs, at-home fitness classes, Native Theater Thursdays. There's a lot of events that just pop up. So continue to follow the social medias to keep up to date on that. I'm so happy to have you all here. Our past social justice series focused on Native-led movements happening in Mashpee, Shinnecock, Wet'suwet'en, Lakota tribal territories, Southwestern tribal territories. We talk about mutual aid and whatever movements that are Indigenous-led across Turtle Island. Throughout these installments, we are continuously working on our collective understanding of how to garner intertribal solidarity, flesh out our definitions of self-determination, settler colonialism, and continue to share resources. And some updates, if you continue to attend the social justice series, we will be moving the event to every other week in favor of spending more time building our social justice series handbook. So we'll be sitting down in community to talk about the Not Your Mascots movement by discussing the big win for Indian country. This includes a discussion about the stereotypes that mascots are tied to and how these are detrimental to Native communities. We will examine how some Native people have organized and mobilized against mascots. And finally, we will plan to discuss what the win means for Native peoples and what direction and actions are needed afterwards. The Washington football team began using the name the R word in 1833. Last week, the Washington football team announced that it would change its name with the pressure from corporations. This simple explanation ignores the history of Indigenous activists who have continuously organized to change the name. In this panel, we'll talk to some Indigenous people about their experiences, perspectives, and strategies for organizing against racist Native mascots. We are so lucky to have Amanda Blackhorse with us here today. Amanda Blackhorse, a Diné activist, social worker who has been organizing and mobilizing against Washington football team's name. In 2006, Blackhorse and other Indigenous people filed a petition seeking to cancel the use of the word. In 2014, she and others won the case against the football team in trademark law, but the case was overturned in 2017 in the Supreme Court. We are also joined with Jeffrey Darrensburg, a member of the H community, who is also deeply involved in activism as well. So we're so lucky to have these two individuals with us here today. Before we get into the topic, I kind of wanted to go over a brief timeline. Obviously, this doesn't cover everything, but is a great way to start framing how much work has gone into changing the mascot for the Washington football team. So as I mentioned before, the inception of the name in 1933, 1972, when Native leaders asked for the name to be changed, which they said was a derogatory racial epithet, to which there was no change. 1992, there were relatives that protested at the Super Bowl. More than 2,000 relatives protested the name. Later that year, Suzanne Harjo, who is one of the bigger names you'll see reoccurring if you continue to look into this issue and the work that has gone into it. Suzanne Harjo and a group of 6 other relatives filed a petition with the US Patent and Trademark Office asking it to revoke the team's federal trademark registrations. 1993, a senator introduces a bill to block new stadium on RFK's site, meaning with Cook looking into a location to build a new stadium to replace RFK, which is the stadium. Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell introduced a bill to block the team from using land on the federally owned RFK site unless it agreed to change its name. And throughout this time, we're seeing universities and high schools over the past 30 years changing their names as well. 1999, a temporary win for Suzanne Harjo, the US Patent and Trademark Office ordered the cancellation of Redskin trademarks. And yeah, so that's like a brief history up until 2000. Some of this you'll see reoccurring. Amanda Blackhorse obviously continued the fight with the patent and got a petition started again with some relatives in Arizona. So we are here with Amanda Blackhorse here today. Amanda, could you please introduce yourself and some of the work that you've done?
My name is Amanda Blackhorse, and and I'm originally from Big Mountain, Arizona, I have been a part of the Washington fight for about 16 years or so, and about 12 years of that was spent in litigation with the Washington team. And so it's been a pretty long battle. Prior to that, Native people, as Tatiana was saying, Native people have been fighting this issue for decades, as early as the 60s. So it's an issue that has been going on for a very long time. And I was brought into it back in 2005 by Suzanne Harjo. And Suzanne Harjo, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with her. She, I call her the mother of the movement, because she really brought up this issue at a time and started the first case against the Washington team at a time when it was just incredibly unpopular. Nowadays we can find a lot more support for the issue, but in the early 90s, late 80s, I mean, it was something that was pretty foreign to a lot of people. So yeah, so that's who I am. And I'm a social worker, a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a mother, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. We're so honored to have you on our panel today. We also have Jeffrey Darrensburg. If you could please just introduce yourself and a little bit about the work that you do, that would be great.
Sure. Yiltol Anghike Jeffrey Darrensburg, Takapo Ishak Yukitiki Yanoshkinulo. I'm Jeffrey Darrensburg, a member of the Atakapo Ishak Nation from Southwest Louisiana. I live in Bulbancha, which is what colonists attempted to rename as New Orleans. It is the place of other languages. That's what it means in the original. And that's how I refer to this place exclusively. I have been involved in increasing awareness of the tremendous contributions of Indigenous people to Louisiana culture and to the culture of the Gulf South. And I am someone who has lived in some major football territory. I grew up in Itahoma, which is otherwise known as Baton Rouge, Louisiana, home of the LSU Tigers. I have family who have worked for the New Orleans Saints since its first day of operation. I attended Notre Dame for a bit. I have lived near Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm definitely familiar with football culture, and this is an interest I have because a lot of what my own personal writing and activism revolves around is Indigenous representation. I'm really pleased that you had me on, and I'm so pleased to see Amanda. I've been following your work for a bit, and it's just a tremendous honor to see you. And I think this is a terrific topic of conversation where people so rarely hear from the Indigenous point of view on this. So thank you for having this session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I do have a few questions for you all. And this will obviously, you know, you can answer it how you see it. But I guess first off, Amanda, where do you see this movement going from this point forward? I mean, there are a lot of like articles kind of, you know, throwing out ideas, how to engage with whatever new name is coming out. And it seems like there might be stuff there that we need to pay attention to. I was curious what your insight into that was.
So right now, I'm just waiting to see how the team is going to rebrand their franchise. You know, they did make the announcement that they were going to retire their name and logo, which is, you know, which is great. But they've also have said on the record that they were going to rebrand to something that honors Native American people and honors the military. So we don't know at this point. I feel like they kind of just throw out, you know, small statements here and there. And I say that they're gaslighting everyone. Just, you know, I think that the change that they're forced to make, of course, it's come because they have to do it. It's not because they want to. And so just knowing the team and have worked with them for, well, not work with them, but work, I guess, against them all of these years. I know that their intentions were they've never had Native people in mind. They've never really have put forth that good faith toward Native people throughout all these years. And so I'm afraid that they're going to try to rebrand to something that is inappropriate, something to do with Native people, even if it was a single arrow or a single feather or something like that. Like, that's just, we are completely against that. They need to do a 100% rebrand without any Native imagery. And from what I understand, the shareholders that press the team to make the change are also advocating for that as well. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with that. I do know that trademark law just takes time. So, you know, I don't know how this next season is going to look. Are they going to play still under the R word? Are they going to change it right before? I mean, we just really don't know. So the work is not done. We still have to be vigilant with them. But just the retirement of the R word is a big success, I think. So that's great. We can celebrate that part. The retirement of that logo as well is a great thing. So we're going to celebrate that. And I think that really signals to a lot of other teams, like the Kansas City team, the Atlanta team, the Chicago team, and other schools around the nation, that they need to also make a change as well. And so I know some of them, well, and also the Cleveland team, and they said they were going to change their name, so not sure what's happening with that. We got to keep an eye on that as well. So we just have to put a little bit more pressure on those other teams as well. And I think this is the time, like where this is our window of opportunity. And that's kind of what we have to go for right now. Oh, and then the other thing, sorry, the other thing too is that lately we've been working with local schools as well. So on our website, it's up there, it's nomornativemascots.org. You can go there and see a list of petitions from just local schools who are working to change their name. So someone in that community has picked up the fight and decided to go and ask their school, demand that their school change their name or their logo or whatever. So take a look at that. Right now there's 40 of them on there. So it's growing too. I still have to add a couple more. But just go on there, sign petitions, support these local schools. I mean, and some of them, the names are horrific and their logos are just horrific. Like, it's just insane what some of these schools do. And a lot of the time we don't know about these schools until the media is on them, until people actually, you know, expose it. So if you want to support, check out our website.
Definitely. Yeah, I was going to bring that up and have you speak a little bit more on that. But for people that are tuning in, that's not yourmascot.org, I believe.
It's nomornativemascots.org.
Okay, let me write that really quick.
And then you just click on take action.
Okay, sweet. So it's pretty easy to navigate. I was like clicking through everything the past few days, and everything is very, very organized and well laid out. Definitely something to keep on a bookmark so that you can, and as well, you can donate. I believe there's an option to donate on this site as well. So feel free to drop some dollars for the work. And yeah, so there is this issue of honoring, you know, Indigenous people, which ties in closely with representation. So my next question is, do these representations honor Indigenous peoples? And this can be a question for either you or Jeffrey Darrensburg. And with that question, you can also maybe reframe it into what you would like to see rather than.
I guess I can start. I don't think that when I see things after my tribe, for example, and I think every person who is in an Indigenous nation in this country will eventually have something named after your people. And something that often happens in Louisiana is that Mardi Gras crews who do parading and themed events are named after our tribes. There are other things. There's a part of Louisiana called the Attakapas District, and our tribe is the Attakapas Ishak, named after us. And we see all kinds of things named after us that claim to honor us. The problem is that whenever I see something named after us that claims to honor us, it's never us that they're representing. They are usually dressed like Plains Natives people, which is, I mean, Plains Natives are some of the coolest people on earth, and I can understand, you know, but that's not how we dress, and those aren't representations of our culture. I guess I don't ever feel honored by someone who doesn't even take the time to get to know me or get to know what our culture is about or recognize the elements of our culture that are prominent in our state. And I also don't think that that's a good way to honor someone. I don't think I've ever met a Native person who has felt honored by the R word, or who has felt honored by the Kansas City football team. I just don't, I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever asked, but I also think they don't really care. When they say they're honoring me, I don't think that they really care to ask if I feel honored by it or if anyone else feels honored by it. And I think I don't think it's really honoring at all. I think it is maybe like fetishization or a desire to take on certain aspects of another culture, but it's also a culture that is constantly denigrated. And I don't think that's the way to honor Indigenous people at all. It doesn't do that in the slightest.
Definitely. And I agree wholeheartedly. I definitely would like to see all of these institutions doing a lot more to quote unquote honor, you know, Native communities. And a lot of that starts with actually having conversations. And it's a much bigger problem than what it looks like. And Amanda, I know that in Not or More Than a Word, the documentary, you spoke a little bit more about how this expands into a bigger systemic issue. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, so I think that when we talk about challenging Native mascots, we're not just focused on football. We're not just focused on one team. I think this is what we're dealing with here is the dehumanization of Indigenous people and the colonization of our identity. And so, you know, through colonization, we have been affected in every single way possible. You know, our land, our food, through our children, the intergenerational and multi-generational trauma that has carried on through that we still are dealing with today, and our, you know, so many other things, but also our identity as well. And so I think that when we talk about how we are, as Native people, Jeffrey and Tatiana, you both have said this, you know, we're never able to really share who we are authentically, and people don't want to see that part of us. They would rather see what they see in Hollywood. They would rather see what they see in the old Western movies, because that's what people love. That's what America loves. America loves to play Indian, and it's a favorite pastime. And if you you know, get a chance, read Phil Deloria's Plain Indian, and he talks about that. It's you know, non-Native people have taken on this identity of Native people as their own, so that they could feel like they are part of this country. They can feel like they are part of this land when they're settlers, when they are descendants of immigrants in this country. And so attaching their identity onto Native people, or what was, you know, the Hollywood Indian, makes them feel great, and it lifts them up. And in Stephanie Freiberg's research, she talks about how when she studied how exposing stereotypes of Native people to Indigenous youth, she noticed that no matter what type of images, even, you know, it could be a positive thing or, you know, a negative thing, something that they say, oh, I love this image, this is something I identify with, it, no matter what, it lowered their self-esteem because it was looked at within a Western context. And so what they also found was that non-Native children actually, their self-esteem actually increased when they were exposed to those images. So non-Native people can feel great about Native mascots while we feel bad about them. And those are the psychological factors. I mean, that's not just someone's opinion. I mean, that's empirical research data. And so, you know, when we talk about this as a larger issue, this has nothing to do with someone's opinion. You know, someone says, oh, it doesn't bother me, because you'll hear that within some Native American circles. They'll say, oh, it doesn't bother me, it actually makes me feel good. I've even heard some Native people say, if it goes away, you know, our identity is gonna be gone forever. No one's gonna remember us as Native people. And it's like, well, our identity shouldn't lie in a football team. You know, we should be able to understand who we are, where we come from, and be able to share that authentically from ourselves, within our communities. And so it's really about humanizing us as Native people. And if we can build a world where our children don't have to navigate through stereotypes, constantly have to speak up for Native people in classrooms, have to, you know, feel bad on Sundays when everyone's talking about football. If we can build a world where our children can navigate it better, I mean, that's really what it's about. It's about, you know, the future of our youth. And it's about taking down these stereotypes that create barriers for us to live, to work, to go to school, to do anything in our lives. So yeah, that's what it's about.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think to further extend that, I was curious, there was an action on Juneteenth that happened at the RFK Stadium, and this involved, or ended with, a monument being rightfully taken down. And a lot of people put that into the timeline of the name being changed. So my question next is, do you see a connection to the toppling of racist statues and the name change? What does this signal to you? And this can be a question for both of you.
Well, just real quick about the statue. So George Preston Marshall, I had learned about him years ago, and was just so surprised that the owner or the founder of the Washington football team was a very proud racist. I mean, he was not trying to hide it. He was overtly racist against Black people, but fetishized Native people and loved Native people, and the images, you know, that he was able to bring into the franchise. And so, and he was a very proud segregationist, and his team was the last to integrate, and he was racist, you know. And there's even images of people when he was forced to actually integrate his team by law. You know, law was pushing him to do it. They had the KKK out protesting outside of the stadium, wanting to keep the team white. And so the toppling of that monument was monumental, and it was so great to see. And I honestly just never thought that would happen, because it seemed like it was just so embedded into the team, and they were so proud of the history of the Washington team, and still are. A lot of them still are very proud of the history of the team. But what we know is that the team, their foundation is rooted in racism towards Black people, towards Indigenous people. And so to see that come down was just like, you know, it was great. And I don't think that we would be where we're at today. I don't think that the team would have retired their name or their logo if it weren't for the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, I don't think that we would be here. And so I think that what happened was people really began to understand what racism is, or maybe not everyone, you know, a lot of people began to understand what racism is, and began to really re-examine everything around us, from statues to Confederate flags to, I mean, but we've all always known this as people of color, right? We've all always have seen the team and like, man, that's really racist. We see a Confederate flag, like that needs to come down. But I think what happened was the majority and the masses were like, oh, wow, let's look around and let's really examine who we're really actually looking up to here. I mean, even statues of presidents who owned slaves are being taken down as well. And so I think that's really where that push came from. And yeah, so rest in peace, those who have, you know, who are gone, and you know, it's really sad that we have to be here because of the murder of George Floyd, you know, that people have to realize all of this because of that. And so,
Well, I've certainly taken part in a number of protests involving statues. As some of you may know, where I live in Bulbancha/New Orleans, we have had several really contentious statues removed in the last few years, and I have witnessed the struggle on both sides. I mean, even it was contentious here to remove what was called the Liberty Place Monument in the French Quarter here, which was essentially a monument to the KKK. I was present at some of the monument removals. I was present at many of the protests where there were extensive numbers of counter-protesters, often wearing neo-Nazi uniforms and other open symbols of white supremacy. I've noticed living in the South that since I was a child in the 70s, I have seen an uptick in open displays of Confederate regalia. I think it's a feeling I have, but I think I'm 20 years ago here. It seems like in this moment of reaction, just as there are re-examinings of what public monuments honor, there are also those who are very proud of certain monuments and proud of the racism that they represent. And I think the monuments coming down is a really good thing. They are from a particular time period, what we call the lost cause, where people were trying to rewrite the history of the Confederacy, trying to sanitize the history of slavery. Here we have a monument, a prominent monument in our city to a prominent slave trader and of course architect of genocide, Andrew Jackson. I would like to see that monument come down. It was beheaded once in 1938, and that was not enough. They put the head back on, and these monuments do make a statement. They make a statement about what we value. And I think having the monuments come down indicates that the pressure that has been building for decades is coming to fruition. And I do think I agree with Amanda that it is related to the name change. It's related to a lot of activists working on this problem and helping people to understand that it is disrespectful and mean and racist to honor certain things in the way they do. I think on the other hand, I think that with the Washington team name, as with other similar names that have gone away, we will continue to see them. People will continue to make goods with these names on them. They will probably become popular with certain political sectors. I know from when I lived in Illinois, when University of Illinois got rid of Chief Illiniwek, there was kind of a slight uptick in people wanting that gear, and you can still purchase this merchandise. They got rid of it in 2007. I also used to live not too far from a town in Illinois called Pekin, whose mascot of their high school team is so obscene I can't even say it. And you can still find brand new gear being produced. They got rid of the mascot in 1981, but you can still find it and purchase new gear of Pekin's team. And people who are very proud of that in certain sectors and wearing it as a way, kind of as a dog whistle to taunt people, or expressing their racism without coming right out and saying it. And that means that the struggle is going to go on. But I do think that the successes that we have had recently are all related. And I think one lesson of the civil rights movement from the 60s forward is that we cannot rest on these laurels, that we have to keep going, because the other side has been unrelenting. They will never stop. And so we have to never stop.
Thank you. And I think that leads me into my next question, which is in regards to organizing. Obviously, you both have done a lot of work in organizing surrounding these issues. What could you suggest to people that are coming into this work, especially regarding the name change, statues coming down? What are some helpful hints that you could give to our listeners?
Well, there is a lot of information out there, and a lot of folks who already have their boots on the ground and have been addressing these issues for a while. So it would be good to just kind of get some background knowledge of what's going on. And, you know, as the season starts, I know there's always protests all over the nation. With the Washington team, you know, I know with the Kansas City team, I know it's really difficult to navigate that right now in the pandemic that we're in. But there's always creative things that you can do where you're at. You know, this year we were talking about planning because the Washington team is supposed to be here in Phoenix in September, and with the pandemic, you know, it hitting the Southwest so hard, you know, a lot of us are very much afraid of going out, and just because of, you know, what our families are going through out here. You know, it would be, I think, disrespectful to a lot of our communities to be out. So we were talking about doing a media campaign and doing videos, and you know, there's other things that you can do, you know, during this time. But I would also just really try to center Native people into these spaces. You know, I'm all for Indigenous-led movements, and I know that right now with the schools, because there's schools changing all over the nation, and a lot of them aren't Native. You know, the schools are sometimes 90% white. So, and you know, they're in an area where there aren't a lot of Indigenous people, so they reach out. So there's always support out there, and it would be important to just kind of do some research and see what is out there. But I think it's always important to just keep saying, you know, these things, keep talking about it, keep putting it out there. And because I think that's what keeps that momentum going for us.
Definitely. With that said, I did want to open the floor to the people tuning in on Zoom or Facebook. If you had any questions, you can write those into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer those questions. I believe, Marley, you had a question.
Sorry, I just want to say thank you to the presenters or the panelists. I think a lot of the points y'all made were just on the nose, and I'm listening in, I guess calling in, and I'm nodding in agreement, like, oh, that's a good point. So my question is a little bit imaginative, because what Amanda said, that, you know, you felt it was almost impossible for the name to be changed. You know, like it seemed like something that was so far in the future, or I guess it wasn't something that seemed tangible. And I believe Jeffrey said, you know, it kind of aligns with what Jeffrey said too, which is that we can't stop. We should just keep going and keep demanding more. And with this win of a large popular football team, I was wondering, what are some new things that you once considered impossible to be more tangible? Or like, what are some new goals that with this win that you're like, wait, maybe we should demand more. Maybe we should push for more, you know, and you know, like this could just be something that, for me, organizing, you have to be imaginative. And that's kind of like the question is like, what are some other things now because of this that you're like, we should start to make more demands? What would be some of these goals? And this is for anybody, by the way. So, yeah.
Well, I think that it's really hard to say because, you know, like I was saying, I didn't realize that this would happen, you know, and then everything just started kind of crumbling down, and I'm like, holy cow, you know. And I mean, it's just, everything was just happening so fast, and it wasn't just with the team, it was kind of all over the place too. There was like a lot of, you know, other symbols that were coming down, statues to Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's. I mean, like all of these symbols, images of racism were like falling left and right. And it's like, wow, who's next, you know? So I think at this point, like anything is possible. And we have to go for the whole thing, you know, with the other football teams, the other, the other major league teams. And then, you know, right now we're tackling at the elementary, high school level as well. But I think that I don't know what's going to happen. I really, at this point, I think anything is possible. And I'm waiting for that, for people to sort of wake up and see, and then this kind of unravels onto something else, you know. And it's just so crazy to see for me. Like, I honestly, in my lifetime, I never thought I would see the Washington team change their name, just because of how much pushback we've gotten from them all of these years, and all of the negative energy and the hatred and the violence and the stalking and everything that's happened because of this team, you know. And to have it happen now, I just think that anything is possible at this point. And also the investor push was a really great, I think, strategy during this time. I don't think those investors would have made this change 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. I think the investors made the change because of the climate that we're in right now. And so, you know, we just don't know.
I like this question a good bit. I would say that it is a great victory to have the team change its name. I think that the fact that they fought against it for so long indicates that many of these victories are significant, how long it took and how much fighting and struggle for justice this involved. I think we have hundreds of years of injustice packed on top of this land. And so to envision something else, it almost seems hard to envision a world without those injustices. But I think one thing that activist movements since, you know, say 1960 forward have shown is that it pays to think really big and to think of institutions that are deeply embedded in our society disappearing, things like segregation, or before that, chattel slavery, which transformed. And I guess, like, I'm still hoping we can rid slavery from the United States entirely in all of its forms. But I think it's important just to dream as big as possible. And I guess the ultimate dream for me is that people will want to change names, not because they are afraid of investors or afraid of being called racist, but because they have a change of heart where they empathize with other people and respect other people. And I guess in this sort of field, that's what I would really want. And that's a big dream and a hard dream and something that often seems impossible. But it's the thing I think that would make such a huge difference in our society, is to increase the general level of empathy that our citizens have for each other. And I guess that's my dream. If I have to think of a really big dream I would like to see enacted. And I'm not going to say it can't happen, because there's no use fighting for something unless you think it can happen, and I think it can.
Awesome. It's really empowering to hear both of you speak on that. So we do have another question from Felicia Tagapan. Their question is, how much of an impact do you think corporate sponsors with major funding made this particular franchise? Do you think they will leverage their power to help other teams drop racist names? And that's also in the chat if you want to look at it again.
Yes, so I think that so I think that was the push, that was the final push over the edge that they needed. And you know, it is, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, it's very frustrating because, you know, just reading about it in the news, people are like, the corporate sponsors are responsible for this. And it's like, no, Native people have actually been pushing these sponsors for years and years. I mean, FedEx, over, you know, decades, Native people have been pushing them. And they just have never moved. They've always deferred to the Washington team. Oh, Dan Snyder, that's his team. You guys need to talk to him about that. And so I think that they were more willing to move now because of what's happening in society now, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, because of, people confronting racism and that sort of thing. So, but Native people were behind that for many, many years. It's just, this time really got them to make that move finally. And then also, from what I understand, those same investors are also wanting to address other teams as well. So we'll see.
Awesome. All right. Just for the people that are tuning in on Facebook right now, you can find out more information at www.nomornativemascots.org. There are tabs there for actionable items, to donate, to resources, so that you can up your game on the history and all of that good stuff. So I would definitely recommend checking that website out. As well, you can check out More Than a Word, a documentary film on this topic. So just for the people that are tuning in, we also have another question, and this is from Kaylee. Kaylee writes, what is the best argument to make about a mascot that is an object? I come from a town that uses the Tomahawk as their high school mascot. There has been a petition started for a change, and it has sparked a lot of outrage. Most people just see this as an axe, but there's a lot more symbolism behind it. How, as a white ally, can I convince others that this is not okay? Another argument was made that we pay taxes to pay for school uniforms, signage, etc. They feel the change will affect taxpayers. And that is also in the chat. So if any of you have some suggestions there.
I think with schools, there's a difference in that there's often not the same corporate sponsorship that can be leveraged to influence a change. But I think what can be done is some of the resources you have mentioned earlier is to steer people towards really clear evidence-based research about the effects of Native mascots, and to lay it out as clearly as possible. Also to note how it is part of a general change over the course of the United States. Many other schools are changing their mascots, are seeing that that is the correct thing to do. I think activism on the part of students can be very effective because many students may want to be active about this. I would also say that, like, make suggestions of other things they could name it or whatever, but also to bring in people from the local Native community to talk about that might be something that I would advise. And also just to say, look, schools have always been a battleground for racism in the United States. They've always been a place of, where racist ideology has attempted to influence policy, be that segregation or whatever else. And I think school systems, many teachers and principals and like, would probably like to come down on the side of being anti-racist, and it would tell them like, hey, here's an opportunity you have right now to do this. And until you do this, please don't trot out, so-called woke pronouncements of empathy with anti-racist movements. Here's something you can do right now, and challenge them to, put their money where their mouth is and actually do something that can correct a bit of racism that they have in their school system, and just challenge them to be consistent in their ideals. I mean, almost every school system makes some sort of anti-racist statements, but challenge them to be really consistent with that and to move on it. And
that's really great. So there's also about the Tomahawk part. So, like if we look at a team like the Kansas City team, the term chief is not technically a racist term, right? You can call, there's like the chief medical officer, the chief of the fire department, or that actual term isn't necessarily derogative, but you can make it derogative. You can make it a racial slur when you call a Native man, "Hey chief," and then it becomes racist. And so we have to look at some of these things from a sort of a Native perspective, and what stereotypes are, and what type of imagery that creates in the school system. So it might just be a tomahawk, but what do people do with tomahawks? Do they do the tomahawk chop while they're in football games or basketball games? Do they have other Native imagery? Do they allow people to wear red face? Do they allow people to wear headdresses and dance around? Do they have a mascot that dances around at halftime? What else is happening there? So it's not always about terms that are racist. It's about the type of culture that it brings, the toxic culture that promotes stereotypes and that perpetuates violence towards Native people. So that's a form of violence when people parade around in red face and fake headdresses, mocking Native culture, mocking Native spirituality. So that type of behavior is also very, very concerning. And that's the issue that we have with the Kansas City team, with the Braves, with the other teams, is that they do the tomahawk chop. And right now they said they're going to re-examine it, but they've been trying to re-examine it for a year. And it's like, what else do you need to re-examine? It's offensive, just do away with it. And I think they took down some sort of statue outside of the stadium, the Braves did, and it said something like Chop Nation or something like that. And they took that down. It's like, oh, great, wonderful. You took down one little statue. What are you going to do about the racism in your stadium? And so we have to really push that and get people to understand it from that perspective. Also, I do know that Adidas, I think they had a program that were helping local schools with name changes. I'm not sure if that is still happening, but I'll go ahead and put some information in the chat box about that. And you can email them and ask. I do need to figure out some more information about that as well. So, and if it costs them more money, who cares? They need to pay for this. Make them accountable. They need to use funding, whatever funding they have to address this issue, and they always put it back on tribes and say, oh, that tribe, will you pay for it then? Since you guys are the ones who want it gone. It's like, no, you're not learning anything here. And we want to know that you understand that what you have been perpetuating all these years is wrong. And this is how you are going to make it right.
Thank you. We have one last question from Facebook. It reads, how can we get into the deeper systematic issues? So I guess this is another imaginative question for both of you.
I would say one way is to get into the deeper issues is to tell the truth. Tell the truth about Indigenous experience in this country, in this hemisphere since 1492. Tell the truth about acts of genocide. Tell the truth about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Tell the truth about healthcare outcomes, about poverty, about discrimination. Tell the truth. And people might not listen to the truth, but I think it is important to us to keep telling the truth. To keep telling the truth for those who will listen, and to make sure that materials that represent Indigenous people, be there in schools or anywhere else, reflect our lived reality, reflect our true history, reflect what we have actually been through and who we actually are. And I think that goes a long way. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea, the pyramid of white supremacy. And at the base of that pyramid is indifference. It's indifference and mischaracterizations. And I think that indifference to our struggles, indifference to our history, ignorance of our history, willful ignorance or not, forms a firm foundation for all sorts of ills in relation to Indigenous people. And I think it's important to keep telling the truth about us.
Yeah, I think it's important to also go back to our foundation, and how did we get where we're at today? And for me, as when I was younger, I didn't see myself as a Native person that I saw on TV. You know, I didn't see the way that people were referring to Indigenous people or Native people. I didn't think that was me, because it looked so much different from me. And so also when I was in school, I learned about Christopher Columbus. I learned that he discovered America. I learned that the Pilgrims and Indians ate together and everything was just fine after that. And that Native people willingly gave up their land. And that, I mean, just all of these lies that we're fed. I think that we have to go back to those, and we have to correct those wrongs, within ourselves and then with the people around us. And I think this is a great time to do that, because as we see Christopher Columbus statues falling, you know, statues of presidents falling, we can now talk about that. You know, Abraham Lincoln, you know, everyone says he freed the slaves, which he really didn't. But, you know, he was also responsible for the largest mass hanging of people in this country, the Dakota 38, I think it's +2, I believe. And then also the Navajo Long Walk. He was president during the Navajo Long Walk, which was, you know, a genocide inflicted upon the Navajo people. So we have to like have those discussions and correct those wrongs. I think it's really important, and we can do that through education. We can do that in schools, and every sort of work that you do is uncovering a lot of that.
Thank you. So we are getting close to the end of this installment. So I would just like to provide an opportunity for both of you to say any like last words or projects that you have coming up, actionable steps for listeners and whatnot. So if you have anything else to share, this is your time to do so.
Well, I hope that people will keep this issue in the forefront and keep learning about it. I always do a lot of activism about the word Bulbancha, so I want to say Bulbancha is still a place, and that is, if you come to visit our little city here on the Mississippi River, I hope you will use that word. And I thank you for having me on. It's such an honor, and I just like, Amanda, just hearing you talk, I just wanted to listen to you talk for a very long time. It was just wonderful to hear your words, and thank you so much for inviting me. And no matter where we are in this land, from the Gulf Coast where I am to the East Coast where many of you are, it is one struggle. And we are united in that purpose of Indigenous liberation and justice for Indigenous people.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm incredibly honored to talk to everyone. You know, it's, you know, we're on different sides of the country, but you know, I think what I've seen in working, you know, with natives from other tribes is that, you know, we might be different in that we have different creation stories and different you know, surroundings and environments and languages and stuff like that, but we all share sort of the same history and the same traumas and the same sort of stories. And so I'm always happy to speak to Native communities all over the place. So, but also, I do also want to just give a shout out to some of the other folks who are doing some really, really great work right now around this issue. There's a group called Illuminatives, and I'll put the link in the description or the box here. They're doing some really great work. They did a really awesome media campaign in the last month. Also have been working with the on the investor campaign, but the investor campaign came from the First Peoples worldwide, and they're also I can put the link in there as well, unless you guys have it. And they you know, really push the investors recently to make the changes, or to call on the team to make the changes. So, and there's just so many other people like Suzanne Harjo. Definitely look her up and all of the work she's done, not just on Native mascots, but on, you know, a lot of other issues around policy. Some of the laws and the policies that we lean on today, she's had a hand in those when we're talking about Indigenous sovereignty and Native law and stuff. And also there's some local groups in DC. There's a group called No Name Change, No Stadium. They've also done some great work, as well as a non-Indigenous group called Rebrand Washington. They've done a lot of footwork as well. The National Congress of American Indians has always done a tremendous amount of, a lot of work throughout the years on this issue as well. There's also the Change the Mascot campaign with the Untitled, and Not Your Mascots as well. So I have a lot of those links in on our website, so you can check that out at nomorenativemascots.org. But thank you for having me. It was fun.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, both Amanda Blackhorse and Jeffrey Darrensburg. It was, we're #blessed to have you and hear your words. That is all of the time we have today. Feel free to unmute yourself to say thank you to the speakers.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it. Great talk. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate it all. Thank you.